One might wonder why it is necessary to so vigorously argue the existence of God, since this individual, Edward Thompson, said it this way. He said, "The doctrine of the one living and true God, creator, preserver, and benefactor of the universe, as it solves so many problems, resolves so many doubts, banishes so many fears, inspires so many hopes, gives such sublimity to all things, and such spring to all noble powers, we might presume, would, as soon as it was announced, to be received by every healthy mind." And this was found in Evidences of Revealed Religion, Hitchcock and Walden from Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1870, or page 1872. Or actually, in 1872 is page 1. But some, however, contrary to their higher interest, have refused to have God in their knowledge, and thus have become vain in their reasonings and foolish in their philosophy. Turn your Bibles to Romans, the 1st chapter, and let's look at verses 21 and 22, and also verse 28. Who would like to read that for me? Jensen over here. Romans, the 1st chapter, verses 21 and 22, and then verse 28, Jensen.
Okay, Romans 1:21. Because, although they knew God, they did not glorify Him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things.
Okay.
28, you said.
Yes. 21, 22, and 28. Okay? The truth of the matter is, all such unbelief springs from an urge to be free of any responsibility to a higher power. And it is grounded in rebellion. And this is what the unbeliever has. Yes?
Want me to read 28?
Yeah, you did not read 28, did you?
No, I read 20.
Well, please read 28.
Okay, 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do things which are not fitting.
Okay. And this is what's going to happen to the unbeliever, is they're going to be given over to a reprobate mind because they are grounded in rebellion. Well, when we look at the nature of the proof then, the existence of God can be moved or can be proved by anyone who is a fair-minded person. You and I can prove it. We can go to the Scriptures and we can prove that God exists. We can look around us and we can see the things that have been created, and we know that God exists. But when you see that word proved, it is not meant that God's existence can be scientifically demonstrated to human senses, in the same way that one might prove the existence of the Pacific Ocean. We can go to the Pacific Ocean and we can prove it's there. We can see it, right? But we cannot see God. Therefore, faith has to play a role in our acceptance of God. And so the Bible makes no formal effort to prove the existence of God in a systematic way. In fact, God is simply stated in the first verse of the English Bible when it says, "In the beginning, God." And you and I accept that. But for the non-believer, they do not accept it. So, however, evidence which is based solely upon experiment and observation is not the only basis for establishing a provable case. It should be recognized that the Bible makes no formal effort to prove the existence of God in a systematic way. And the fact that God is simply stated in the first verse. So this plain but lofty affirmation of Jehovah's being is in striking contrast to the paganistic legends of many world regions. For example, the Egyptians theorized that Osiris, the sun, brought forth various gods who in turn produced others. On the other hand, when you look at the theology of India, it tells of Brahma, the father of all creatures, coming from a golden egg. But when we look at the Bible, we don't see any absurdities like that, do we? The arguments generally employed as proof for the existence of God have been criticized by a variety of philosophies. Some have suggested that they are inadequate to warrant such a firm conclusion, hence total proof is unavailable. And this assumption fails to note, however, that if God is, He is the most vast and comprehensive of realities. So, let's look at man, the religious creature then. First off, there we go. The inclination to be religious is universally and peculiarly a human trait. If you go back and you look at the Hebrew word for man, the Hebrew word actually means upward looking or upward lifting one. An individual who's holding their hands up, recognizing a supreme being. Man worships a supreme being. Though far from their united in their theism, the Greek and Roman philosophers, for example, agreed that some sort of extra human deity or deities existed. You remember the Apostle Paul when he went in the book of Acts and he was sitting with a group of philosophers. What was the one thing that he had expressed with them? Anybody remember? Yeah, he said, I see that you're very religious because you have here the unknown God and you worship, you want to make sure you cover all bases. And certainly the Greek and the Roman philosophers felt this way. They wanted to make sure that they covered all bases because they believed that there was something superior. They didn't know what it was. And even today, as one writer observed, the evidence indicates that no race or tribe of men, however degraded and apparently atheistic, lacks that spark of religious capacity which may be fanned and fed into a mighty flame. And this comes from the one-volume Bible commentary by J.R. Dumlow. And if therefore the world is religious, and if we assume that man is rational, it is impossible that a phenomenon as universal as religion could be founded upon illusion. So, obviously, atheism asserts that primitive man simply personified the forces of nature and made these his God. And others have surmised that man merely invented the God idea. And the mind of man is somehow drawn towards the idea of a supreme being as surely as a compass needle is drawn to the north. So what is the source of this religious tendency within man? Anybody have any ideas? Well, let me offer you several suggestions. First, atheism asserts that primitive man simply personified the forces of nature and made these his gods. I had these on the previous slide, but you didn't respond to them, so we'll elaborate on them a little bit. And we'll go back so you can see these again. Out of these many gods, a chief god or one god eventually evolved. Okay, that's the first premise. This theory involves two false assumptions, however, though. The first assumption, a false assumption, is that man derived his ideas of God from nature. And the second false assumption is it assumes that monotheism has been refined from an earlier polytheism. However, within the past decades, a vast body of evidence has come to light which reveals a degeneration of monotheism into polytheism. Others have surmised that man merely invented the God idea. However, when we look at philosophers, both theistic and infidel, agree that while the imagination may analyze, combine, compound, and modify ideas which are received through the senses, it cannot create an extrasensory idea. Alexander Campbell, in his celebrated debate with Robert Owen, quoted the famous infidel David Hume. David Hume declared that the creative power of the mind amounts to nothing more than the faculty of combining, transposing, augmenting, diminishing the materials afforded to us by sense and experience. And this was in the Campbell-Owen debate, published in the Gospel Advocate back in 1957. Campbell then argued that since the idea of an uncaused first cause, i.e. God, had been in the world since time immemorial, and as the skeptic claimed that such an idea did not originate through reason, skepticism contends that the idea is unreasonable and could not originate through imagination. Campbell went on to say that unbelievers were obliged to show the source of the theistic concept. And he thus logically argued that the concept of God, though greatly perverted in heathen lands, is ultimately traceable to an original communication between the Creator and the creature. And some have felt that there is an innate impression in the human mind of a higher power. One thing, though, is certain, that the mind of man is somehow drawn towards the idea of a supreme being as surely as the compass needle points to the north. Any comments or thoughts? All right, so let's look at the cause and effect then. Turn your Bibles to Hebrews, the 3rd chapter, verse 4, and we'll look at that verse here. Who would like to read that for me? Hebrews 3, verse 4. If you don't volunteer, I'll volunteer you. Wilma over here, Jed. You sure there's people behind you that can't hear, Wilma?
Thank you. For every house is built by someone, but he who builds all things is God.
Okay, thank you. So what we see here is the Hebrew writer, when he wrote this, he stated that every house is built by someone. He suggested the well-known law of cause and effect here. The principle says that wherever there is an effect, there must be an adequate cause. Wherever there is an effect, there must be an adequate cause. Dr. Robert Jastrow, considered by many to be the finest science writer alive today, has observed that the notion of an effect without a cause is witchcraft and not science. And this was published Until the Sun Dies, Warner Books, in 1977. Okay? So here then is the problem. The universe exists. It must in some fashion be explained, and there are only 3 ways to account for it. Only 3 ways to account for it. What do you think those 3 ways are? The universe exists. It must be in some fashion explained. What might be one way that we can explain the universe exists? It was created, okay? What?
They might use the term chance.
Chance, okay.
Like chance working.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Well, let's give you my thoughts on how the universe was created. These are the 3 ways that I put down. First off, it is eternal. If I can get it up there, there we go. It is eternal. Okay. The second thing that we might consider is it is not eternal, rather it created itself from nothing. I don't think anybody here would agree with that, would you? Okay, and so the third one is it is not eternal. It was created by something anterior and superior to itself. Okay? So, as we continue to look at this, let's explore these ideas. And the first thing we'll explore is the universe is not eternal. And certainly it is clear now that the universe is not eternal, isn't it? Eternal would mean what? It was always there. It always existed. It's forever. It doesn't change. It's nothing created. It's eternal. Jastrow declares it this way, in science as in the Bible, the world begins with an act of creation. That view has not always been held by scientists. Well, duh, that's news to me. But the truth is, scientists are still looking for how the Big Bang Theory occurred and all that. He goes on to say, only as a result of the most recent discoveries can we say with a fair degree of confidence that our universe has not existed forever, that it began abruptly, without any apparent cause, in a blinding event that defies explanation. This is how he tries to explain it. The very fact that scientists attempt to assign an age to the universe admits to its having an origin. If it didn't have an origin, they wouldn't be trying to assign an age to it, would they? So, when we look at the second thing, it is absurd, obviously, to even suggest that matter could create itself. There is no known natural process whereby matter could, from nothing, fashion itself. And in fact, Dr. George E. Davis, a physicist, has said it this way. He says, no material thing can create itself. Now, he published this in a book, The Evidence of God in an Expanding Universe, in 1958. The universe is not self-explanatory. Well, so the third thing, the only remaining alternative is that the universe was created by something that existed before it did. Would you agree with that? Also, something superior to it. For the created cannot be superior to the Creator. And something of a different nature, since the finite, dependent universe of matter is unable to explain itself. And in this connection then, if there was ever a time when absolutely nothing existed, then there would be nothing now, for nothing produces nothing but nothingness. Since something does exist then, it must logically follow that something has always existed. The question, though, is exactly what was that? Everything that exists is either matter or mind, isn't it? But something eternal exists because something is here now. Thus, either matter or mind is eternal. But as shown above, matter is not eternal. We've already decided that, didn't we? Therefore, it is mind that is eternal. And the mind is identified and described in the Bible as what? As what?
Soul.
The soul, okay. Eternal soul, okay. And that's correct. But for simplification, I said it is described in the Bible as God. As a further extension of our cause and effect argument, we suggest that physical life itself is explainable only in terms of some eternal, non-physical life force which created life as we observe it. Think about the following here. For example, atheism is forced to assume that physical life at some remote point in the past was spontaneously generated from inorganic materials. But obviously the evidence is squarely against that notion, isn't it? Evolutionist Harold Morowitz stated that the probability for the chance formation of the smallest, simplest form of living organism known is 1 in 10, or 1 times 10 to the 340th million power. Now, to help you understand that a little bit clearer, that is 1 followed by 340 million zeros. That's the probability. Yeah. And that was published in the Energy, Flow and Biology Academic Press in 1968. The entire universe is said to contain only 10 to the 80th electrons. So this is how the probability for the chance of formation of the smallest, simplest form of living organism is known. Dr. Carl Sagan has estimated that the chance of life evolving on Earth is 1 in 10 to 2 billion. That's 1 followed by 2 billion zeros. At least these people recognize something. It would take, if you were tried to write out this number that I just mentioned, 1 followed by 2 billion zeros, here's how big that number is. It would take 6,000 books of 300 pages each just to write that number. 6,000 books of 300 pages each just to write that number. That's how ridiculous the thought is. Yet they expect us to believe it just freakishly happened. That God doesn't exist, that it just came about. Professor Edwin Conklin of Princeton University put it this way. He said, the probability of life originating from accident is comparable to the probability of the unabridged dictionary resulting from an explosion in the printing shop. Now, this was published in the Reader's Digest in January of 1963. So life was either spontaneously generated by accident from inorganic substances, or it was created purposely by an eternal force. Thus, the evidence forces one to believe that life was originally created by an eternal life force. So what we're going to do is build upon the foundation just laid and introduce additional evidence which supports the proposition that God is. God is. But think of some discussion areas here, and I put them all up here. We're just going to look at two of them tonight. You have these in your slide, and you can think about the rest of them. But the first one, in terms of origin, there are but 3 ways to explain the universe. What are these, and which is the most reasonable, and why? Anybody remember what the 3 ways are? You can go back to your slide and cheat if you want to. Huh?
It always was. It came from nothing, and something external and greater than it.
Okay. All right. And so, which is the most reasonable? Is it always was? Is that reasonable? Came from nothing? Is that reasonable? Came from a creator. That's reasonable, isn't it? Okay. Third question. Can faith in God's existence be classified as A, a blind leap in the dark, B, a religious hunch, C, a probable proposition, or D, a reasonably established fact?
C and D.
C and D? Okay. Why do you say C, Dan?
Because it's probable as we explain it to those that don't believe it.
Okay, probable as we explained it to those that don't believe it. Okay. Any other thoughts before we leave the discussion questions? All right, so let's go on then with this case for the existence of God. And first we want to look at God as the lawgiver and designer. And in just a moment we're going to look at this verse here, so you can be turning to it and thinking about who would like to read it when we get there. But what we want to realize is there is a clear and universal trait present in humans that does not exist in the animal world. And what is that clear trait? Okay. And what did you say, Pat? Soul, okay. All right. Tendency to worship a superior being and soul, obviously. The idea is that man is a religious creature, and both what you said is correct. The Bible believer is prepared to explain this fact by noting that God revealed himself to man from the beginning and throughout time. And we can go to Genesis 1st chapter, verse 1, and begin right there. But the atheist has no rational explanation for the religious inclination of man. And one aspect of man's religious behavior is seen in his sense of morality. For example, morality is the conscience that it is quality of the mind that either accuses or excuses human conduct. And that takes us to Romans, the 2nd chapter, verses 14 and 15. Who would like to read that for me? Okay, Dan. Thank you.
Do I need a microphone?
Yes, please.
For when the Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law unto themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them.
Okay. And that's what I said. The conscience is that quality of the mind that either accuses or excuses human conduct. The Bible believer can explain the origin and function of conscience. And when properly taught, and with the presence of proper judgment, the conscience may correctly guide the way one lives. When improperly directed, conscience still exists. It still exists, though it may not correctly function to urge the proper conduct. And by its very existence, the conscience recognizes the existence of morality, and so if one is logical, also recognizes the presence of an ultimate moral source to whom each individual is accountable. And in this connection, then, there are some important questions that demands an answer. And the first question we might ask is, what is the origin of morality? God, okay. What would the what?
What would a non-believer say?
I don't know. What would the non-believer say? Certainly they wouldn't say that it was God. But if one does not acknowledge an eternal mind with which intrinsic goodness is coexistent, how is morality to be explained? Practicality, okay. Is it feasible that somehow raw inorganic matter was able, by means of an extended process, to concoct, promote, and maintain morality? Yes? Okay. Obviously, we need to note some facts here. And the first fact we'll note is the need for morality is universally apparent. Because no sane person will argue that absolutely anything goes. Even the non-believer recognizes that anything does not go, that there are limits to what they can and what they are allowed to do. The expressions ought and ought not are as much a part of the atheist vocabulary as anyone else's. And they accept these limits. But of course, one may become so insistent that he virtually ignores his personal ethical responsibility, but he will never ignore the lack of such in those who would abuse him. In other words, do as I say, but not as I do. Because I have rights that you don't have rights. And if you infringe upon my rights, you are wrong. But it's okay if I infringe upon your rights. That's the attitude that the non-believer might have. But even non-believers admit that morality exists only in conjunction with personal minds. So the next question is, what is the motivation for morality? Any thoughts?
Well, life would be pretty chaotic, and there probably wouldn't be anybody left on the world if there was no morality, because everybody would just, someone made you mad, you just kill them. You know, there wouldn't be anybody left.
Okay. If there was no morality, there'd be nobody left. What? Survival. Well, certainly the atheist attempts to live the moral life because he is convinced that a moral God exists who obligated humanity to morality as has revealed for the good of the species. But what can atheism say? Has morality been evolved?
They just say it's all relative. When you ask somebody that's an atheist,
I-
they just look at it as it's all relative. That's the truth that they say. The people that I've talked to, that's what they believe.
Yeah. That's very
You know,
true.
there is no standard. The standard's what you make from yourself. They believe the standard is within. It's what you think is right. And
Well,
it's
that-
okay, what you think is right is all right for you.
Okay. The infidel would say society evolved it for its own welfare and preservation. That's what the infidel would say. And when we think about that, animals have survived and they have no moral code, do they? So the atheist or the infidel do what, Kathy?
That's instinct.
That's instinct, okay.
Right? That's not making a conscious decision. They go on instinct. That's the animal versus the human.
Okay. What if I decide to put my personal lust ahead of the interest of society? I'd go to jail, okay. What if I reason that I have but one life to live and I will live it for myself alone? Fit right in with a lot of society, wouldn't I? Okay. Do what? Yeah. Some would suggest that such a disposition is selfish. So I might respond, what's wrong with selfishness? I kind of like that car commercial right now, you know, where the salesman's trying to sell them the car. And of course, they're looking at the Honda. And they said, well, does it have Bluetooth? No, you have to go to our zirconium package for that. Well, does it have this? No, that would be very expensive. That's our diamond package or whatever. And he says, well, I think I'll just go over to the Honda because it already has that. And he says, do you realize just how selfish you sound right now? Well, what if I felt that way? What's wrong with selfishness? The unbeliever simply has no answer. And Bertrand Russell wrote it this way. He says, we feel that the man who brings widespread happiness at the expense of misery to himself is a better man than the man who brings unhappiness to others and happiness to himself. He goes on, he says, I do not know of any rational ground for this view. And that was in his autobiography, Volume 3, Simon & Schuster, in 1969. So, how is morality defined then? How would we define it?
I would define it as what is good for everyone.
What is good for everyone, okay? Any other thoughts?
Has to be based on one standard.
Has to be based on one standard, okay?
Dan said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you would be a great way to live.
But I kind of like the idea of do unto others before they do it to you. No? Okay, I agree with you, Pat. So, there is one issue that atheism dreads like a plague. What are the criteria by which the good is to be distinguished from the bad? If there are no universal, eternal, or absolute ethical criteria of right and wrong, then every man becomes his own law then, doesn't he? And actually then, his own God, when you get right down to it. This is precisely what the Humanist Manifestos 1 and 2 allege. These infamous documents say ethics is autonomous, meaning self-law, and situational. This is in the Prometheus book, published in 1977. The truth is, though, the above statement is ridiculously contradictory. And if one suggests that ethics is situational, he is implying that he could do wrong in certain situations. However, if ethics is autonomous, hence man is his only law, how could he ever be in a situation in which his conduct would be wrong? The plain fact of the matter is, if there is no God, there is no such thing as evil. Did God create evil? God did not create evil. Who created evil? Satan created evil? Okay. What did you say over here? God cannot lie. And Satan is the father of all lies. Could we say that man, in essence, created evil, though? Evil was not known until Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. Is that true?
By one man death entered into the world, and by one man life entered into the world.
Okay. Okay.
First man was Adam, second man
Was Christ. Exactly right. So, yes. Adam created sin. Okay. Okay. Yeah, they ate the forbidden fruit. Do what? Well, evil was here. Man did not know evil until Adam committed that sin. So, in essence, man didn't create sin, but man yielded to evil, which man had a choice. And that's the thing. God gives us free choice. The plain fact of the matter is, the bolder atheists admit this to be the case. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist, and man is in consequence forlorn, for he cannot find anything to depend upon either within or outside himself, nor on the other hand, if God does not exist, are we provided with any values or commands that could legitimize our behavior." This is the French philosophers from Descartes to Sartre in the Meridian books published in 1961. Well, that's our second bell, and so we will hold this fourth item here. Does immorality have an ultimate consequence? And we'll discuss that next Wednesday night then. Does immorality have an ultimate consequence? I appreciate your participation tonight. Okay.